when we share some of the things that we struggle with, or when we share some of the experiences that we've had, that it's going to make us look like we're weak. When I share things that I struggle with my mental health as a man, and in relationships as a man, things that I experienced in my past with the church and all these different things, I share those things knowing that those things don't make me weak, right? They don't make me a weaker man. They don't make me a weaker person. And in fact, a lot of those mistakes, a lot of those experiences, as we'll see, those things actually have given us strength. Those things are lessons that we really had to learn. So being vulnerable and sharing that vulnerability is not a sign of weakness at all. Hey, what's going on, Recreators? This is Nick with another episode. My question for you on today's episode is, how can my vulnerability be used as a tool for self-growth? On this episode, we're going to be talking about two things. Number one, we're going to talk about what vulnerability isn't. And then number two, we're going to talk about 3 ways that being vulnerable can help you grow. Listen, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and like if you're finding some value on this. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, drop a review down below. But if you're ready to learn, let's dive in. The first thing that we have to really make clear in discussing vulnerability is what it's not. Now, when I think about vulnerability, I don't think about vulnerability being that we need to air out all of our business. So some folks, and I know that was a hot topic about people being transparent and telling everything that they had going on. I don't really believe that that's what vulnerability is. When you talk about somebody being vulnerable, knowing everybody's business is really not our business. There's a lot of things that we do and a lot of things we have happen in our lives that are really meant to be for ourselves or for those that are close to us. And so being vulnerable doesn't mean that I'm going to tell you everything that is going on with me, all the mistakes that I made, everything that I've done since I was a little kid. That's not what vulnerability is. When we really define what vulnerability is, which we're going to get into in a little bit, is the fact that we're opening up and expressing to others maybe some mistakes that we've made in the past, maybe some things that we've done in the past that we've learned from, so that we'll be able to share those with others and help other people grow, or maybe even learn from some of the mistakes that we've done. So we're not talking about here telling everybody your business, right? Don't go out telling everybody your business. I don't go out telling everybody my business. I share a lot of things with you that have happened in my life and some of the things that I've experienced in my life. But, that's a small percentage of what's really going on or things that I'm really struggling with. So first, it means that we're not airing out of business. Secondly, vulnerability is not something that's supposed to be shame-based. When we talk about being vulnerable, we're not giving and using this tool within our lives in order to shame ourselves with it, right? Because if you think about the struggle that a lot of us deal with, and myself included, is this issue of shame. The things that we've done before that come up, our inner critic wants to try to pop up and remind us of what we've done or who we've been and the things that we've been involved in. And so vulnerability is not us shaming ourselves, or it's not also allowing others to shame us because of the things that we've done and the mistakes that we've had. So it's not shame-based. And then thirdly, vulnerability is not weakness. One of the things that we deal with, especially in our culture, we've seen it happening, and we've experienced it, is this need to always try to put on a front like we've had everything together. When you look at social media, when you look how people are portraying themselves, we see this picture a lot of times in people's lives that everything is great, everything is going perfect, nothing is wrong within their lives. And the reason I feel like that happens is because for many of us, in order for us to be vulnerable, we think it's definitely not a sign of weakness. So before we move on, drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think about what vulnerability isn't, or maybe what your definition of vulnerability is in your life, and how you display vulnerability, or how you may put yourself in positions to be more vulnerable. I'd love to hear down below. So let's recap that real quick. So what vulnerability isn't, and this is important for us to think about as we move forward, right? Number one, we're not carrying out all of our business when it comes to vulnerability. Number two, like I mentioned before, this is not a shame-based thing. We're not trying to generate shame. We're not trying to generate this awkwardness or this feeling of inadequacy by being vulnerable. And then third, vulnerability is not a sign of weakness. Actually, I feel like, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, when you're able to be vulnerable in whatever position that you're in, it actually can show as a sign of strength, right? It can show as a sign of inner strength that, you know, you're comfortable with being yourself. You're comfortable with portraying who you are as yourself to everybody else. It helps to just helps us to just be more solid and more firm in who we are and our foundation that we are. So let's talk about, secondly, the 3 ways that being vulnerable can really help you grow. So here's how I look at vulnerability, and this is how I've looked at it recently. You know, coming out of the environment that we came out of, especially we were heavily involved in the church, I was in the military, all these different things. A lot of those environments do not encourage people to be vulnerable unless there is some kind of advantage to be gained by it, right? So you think about, I remember being in the church many years ago, and one of the big things was like sharing your testimony. So you're getting up in front of a group of people that you really don't know, that you've never really met personally, that you never really interacted with personally, and you're telling them your story on the type of person that you used to be, the things that you used to do, how much sin that you've been involved in, how you were sleeping around, drinking all the time, running all over the place, all these different things. And you're sharing these testimonies with people that you don't know. In effect, and really, when you really boil it down, sharing those thoughts and really sharing a lot of those memories and experiences were really more for the gain of the church. What did they really do for you as an individual? It may have connected with someone, helped somebody, but we were really taught in that environment that sharing our testimony and sharing who we were was a way for us to draw people and people in the church. Looking back on that, I agree with half of it. I agree with the fact we need to let folks know what God can do and how our lives can be changed and how things can turn around, how we can be transformed. I think that's all. But then on the other half of it, I realized that, you know, there needed to be a better motive behind it, right? So when I talk about us sharing our vulnerability and using it as a tool for growth, the first thing that we need to recognize that happens when we become vulnerable with others, helping us grow, is that it helps us to really connect with people on a deeper level. How does that happen? Think about this. I share with you a story, or if I share with you experience that I've had or a mistake that I've had that maybe you're in the middle of dealing with right now. Let's say, you know, it's a relationship issue or something that I may have learned in my marriage by a mistake, or something that I might have gone through within my own marriage, and you're newly married, you're trying to figure this out, you're trying to work these things out. And I come to you and I share this story with you. It's going to help us to connect on a deeper level, because I'm letting down my guard. I'm letting down my defenses. I'm letting you into places of my psyche, places of my mind that maybe I wouldn't necessarily let everybody into. And so when I'm able to do that with someone, when I'm able to connect with someone like that by being vulnerable, it creates this bond between two people. My wife always tells me anytime I go to an event or go to a party or something like that, she always knows where she could find me. I might start walking around and talking to all these folks, but at the end of the night, by the end of it, I'm usually like sitting off in a corner with somebody, talking with somebody one-on-one, really trying to learn how to develop and deepen deeper connection with people. And one of the ways that I do that is just by being vulnerable and really sharing who I am and the things that maybe I've dealt with or the things that I've gone through, and really just learning and trying to be a deeper connector with other people. And I do this by being vulnerable. And that when you learn how to do that, I feel like that part of our vulnerability, when we're able to connect with people on a deeper level, it helps us to grow, because then we realize, you know, that the things that we've experienced, the things that we thought were huge mistakes within our lives and things that were so embarrassing, things that were just in our minds, they were just so far-fetched and we couldn't believe that we actually did these things or were involved with these things. When I let down my guard and I can share that with someone else, that connection that's built is priceless, right? That connection that I'm able to build with another person because I'm willing to be vulnerable is priceless. And then it also shows me and it reinforces to me that it's okay for me to make those mistakes, right? It's okay for me to have gone through maybe the things that I did or had the experiences that I did, because now I'm sharing some of these vulnerabilities with someone else and they're confirming to me, hey, I've struggled with the same thing, dealt with the same thing, I've gone through the same thing, and it's okay. And this is maybe how I made it, or this is how I was able to get over those things. Or maybe I'm able to share with them, this is how I was able to get over those things, and this is how I made it out of those things, right? And so that's the first thing that I think about when we talk about our self-growth and our own growth within our lives, is being able to be vulnerable with others really helps us to just deepen that connection with others in the world. The second part of this is something that I'm a firm believer in, is when we are able to be vulnerable with other people, what it does is it shows the world, especially if we're vulnerable with people over something that we've healed over, right? Or something that we've made it through or we were able to overcome within our lives. When we're able to share those stories, when we're able to share those bits of our lives, those kind of hidden places and hidden things within our psyche and within our lives with other people, man, I feel like that is one of the huge benefits that can help bring healing to the world that we're living in. If you look around, I do this all the time and I think about it all the time, even in my own life. When we look around, there are so many of us that are walking around and we're hurting from different experiences, different trauma. We're hurting from so many different things that have happened to us in our lives. And one of the things that is so helpful, I know for me, when I hear somebody or somebody shares with me something that they've struggled with or they've gone through and they were able to overcome, man, that brings so much healing and so much enrichment to my life, hearing somebody be able to be vulnerable and share those things with me, because it makes me feel like in my mind that when I'm able to hear that and when I'm able to understand that somebody else maybe have gone through or they're going through, you know, what I'm struggling with, man, it helps bring so much encouragement to my life, just knowing that there is somebody else that has gone through this and that they were able to make it, right? They were able to make it through this. They were able to make it on the other side. I know last year I shared a lot of this in some of our previous episodes, just going through my own mental health issues, my own struggles with depression for the first time really in my life, my own struggles with anxiety, all these different things that I faced. When I heard the stories from other people that were able to make it through that, it was so encouraging into my life. So when I'm able to, and when you're able to say, you know what, I can be vulnerable and share those parts of my life, not because I really want anything out of it, not because I really want you to look at me a certain way or somebody to give me certain accolades, but because I can share those things with other people, and that story and that sharing can bring healing into their lives. That's powerful. That's what our world needs right now. Look, it doesn't take us a lot to really look around and understand that our world right now that we're in has been this way over time for so many years, but it doesn't take a lot for us to look around and really recognize that our world needs healing. Our world needs men and women that are willing to be vulnerable enough to say, hey, the things that you're struggling with, the things that you're going through, I've been through them and I made it through, right? This is what I did. This is how I handled it. This is what my mindset was. This is where my heart had to be. This is where I needed help, right? This is how I was able to lower my defenses so I'd be able to share that with somebody else and really help somebody out. And so, you know, thinking about just being vulnerable in those moments, we don't really know sometimes how much healing that can bring to other people. And if you think about it this way, when we're able to bring healing to other people, we're able to be a conduit, I guess you could use a word, for healing in other folks in their lives. it really ends up benefiting us in ways that we can't really measure. We can't measure a lot of that stuff in words. We can't measure a lot of those things in dollars, right? We can only measure those things just by the love and the reciprocalness of healing that comes to us from us just willing to be vulnerable. And so your healing and the things that you've gone through, we have to understand those stories, those things can bring healing and hope to this world. They can bring healing and hope to this world. So many of us are walking around thinking that the stories that we have within our minds, that's one thing I love hearing. I love hearing people's stories. I love talking to people, sitting down with them one-on-one and being like, tell me what happened to you and how you were able to overcome. Because those stories, within those stories, there is a seed of healing and hope that we never know how that could affect someone else and how it could really be a blessing in someone's life. And so when we think about that, understand that us being vulnerable, that healing that you have experienced, that story that you've experienced, it can definitely bring hope into the world. And then lastly, and I've done an episode on this, and I'll make sure that I'm going to actually leave a link to that episode down below. But lastly, what being vulnerable can do to help us grow is that it can help us to choose to be you. I talked about this before, right? Choosing to be me, making the choice to be and show up in this world how I choose to be, not based on how everybody else may be saying that I need to be. So when I'm vulnerable, it strips off, like, who can really hurt me at that point? Who can really damage me? Who can really affect me when I'm the one that's willing to lower my guard and put myself out there, right? I'm the one that's having the choice here, that is saying, you know what, I'm going to choose to be me in this situation. I'm going to choose to show up in this situation in a way that can help those around me, that can bless those around me, that can really benefit those around me. And that choice is ours. It's our choice to be vulnerable. It's our choice to use this as a tool and say, as I open myself up, as I reveal myself, or as I am willing to show the world who I am as a person and just really be who I am as a person, I have to understand that's gonna cause some internal growth within my own self. It's gonna cause some growth within my mind, within my heart, basically just saying that I'm choosing to show up how I am deciding to show up in this world. And that's a vulnerable place to be in, right? Because like I mentioned in that other episode, choosing to be me is going to require me putting myself out there and being threatened with being accepted and worried about the opinions of other people and all these different things. The list goes on. But when I'm able to be vulnerable, it helps me to grow and grow in that comfort of being comfortable of who I am in my own skin. You know, when you think about it and get to the end of this day, that's what we're really needed. That's what we need to strive for. How do we be comfortable in our own skin? How do we be comfortable to who we are and not having to be worried and concerned about what everybody else is saying? And that takes a lot of vulnerability. And in that process, when we really think about it and we examine it, in that process, there's going to be some internal healing, some internal growth that happens because we're willing to be vulnerable. So my challenge to you as we wrap up, how can that vulnerability in your life help you to grow to be who you choose to be and who you really desire to be? How can those moments in our lives that we experience, how can we use that vulnerability as a tool to grow within our lives, to make ourselves uncomfortable in certain situations and to push ourselves? And how can we use the tool of vulnerability to help share our healing or our story or our process with the world and bring hope to the world? How can we connect with others on a deeper level by being vulnerable? I really firmly believe, and this is why I even decided to speak on this, was that I really firmly believe that we need in our world more people that are willing to be vulnerable and open up. It's a fact of life. Anywhere you look at it, we're going to get hurt. Things are going to happen. But if I were to keep myself shelled up, if I were to keep the armor on 100% of the time and never let that guard down and open up to other folks, how would I be able to share my story? How would I be able to share healing with the others in the world? How would I be able to connect? I'm not willing to be vulnerable. So it's my challenge to you today on this episode is try and look at vulnerability as a tool that we can use in order to be someone that can grow in that vulnerability. And I want to hear what you have to say on this. As I always mention on our show, and leave a comment down below, leave a review. Let me know what your thoughts are on this very issue. Maybe you think, maybe you're thinking that opposite. Maybe you're thinking that vulnerability really can't help me to grow. I'd love to hear it. I'd love to have that talk and have that conversation on the other side of it. Maybe that's really not the case. And so before I sign off, as always, if you found value in this content, subscribe, share it with whoever. And if you're listening to this on a podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening to, drop a review down below. This has been Nick with the Life Recreated Podcast. Until next time, keep learning, keep healing, and keep growing.